Do you mind if I make an announcement?
Please, yeah.
We're going to get started with the author talk down here. If you want to talk about aliens and the end of the world tonight, come on down. Feel free to pop in anytime or enjoy your browsing.
Greetings, everyone, and viewers at home. Welcome to our talk and live stream about It's Over or It's Eaten, which, by the way, a great title, and I want to ask you about that a little bit. My name is Shady Rose. I'm your host for this evening. A little bit about Lost City Books, if you don't know. We are a used, new, and rare bookstore located in the heart of Adams Morgan, Washington, D.C. And we've been a store for about 3 years, but this space has been a bookstore for about 40 years. So we've been continuing the incredible legacy of books in this space that's been going on for decades. If you're in town, come on down to 18th Street and browse our shelves. We've got everything you can imagine in varying quantities. A little bit about our author this evening. Rebecca M. Zornow is an alumna of Lawrence University. After graduation, she served in the Peace Corps, where she started school libraries and an art club in rural Eswatini. Rebecca is a former magazine editor-in-chief and runs the book coaching business Conquer Books with her sister, the writer Nicole Van Den Eng. Together with their brother, they founded ConquerCon, Appleton's science fiction and fantasy convention. Rebecca is also a board member of the Kenai Regional Development Fund. Amazing. You know, we talked a little bit about wearing a lot of hats earlier, so I think we're going to talk about those hats a bit today. But welcome, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm really excited to speak about your book, and I'd like to hear a few of your sort of opening thoughts about where this book came from, sort of what sparked it, and how it sort of took form in your mind and in your life as you began to write it.
Yeah, and Shady, thank you so much for your support in getting this set up. And I just think that Lost City Books has such an amazing eye for literature, and you do so much for the community. And so it is a real honor to be here tonight. So thank you. But It's Over or It's Eaten is really a pandemic novel. You know, when we were all sitting home, I got the idea for the book. I wrote it and edited it and brought it to life. But I was thinking, as you do in the shower, about how so often in movies and media and books, we see us humans winning like the war against aliens that we so often see in storytelling. And I was thinking about how unlikely that really would be, and how likely it really is that there potentially could be alien life out there. And I was just thinking about, why don't we tell those stories? Why do we always tell stories about ourselves as heroes? And I was struck with this vision getting out of the shower of this woman, this soldier who fought in the war, who lost everything, and still, you know, at the end of the war, what do? You go home. And what do you do when you have no home to go to? Or how do you move forward from the biggest loss of, you know, your species existence? And so that's really where I got the idea for It's Over or It's Eaten. I wanted to know what happened next to this woman's story, and was surprised. You know, in those moments you have like a seed, and it really does grow, sometimes organically, sometimes you just like have to push out a story idea until it starts to make sense.
I think it's interesting that you took the sort of now pretty common post-apocalypse or alien invasion story that is making its rounds pretty continuously through sci-fi and speculative fiction, and kind of turn it's on its head a bit, sort of examining, I think, the ego of humanity. Like, do we always win? Are we the good guys? Are we the heroes of the story? And what does it look like when we aren't the winners? We're not the victors naturally, right? And something you said about how this was definitely a pandemic novel kind of aligns with that, I think, because this was one of the first times in recent memory, human memory, that human beings did not just immediately win against the thing. I mean, we're still fighting this pandemic, and it affected everyone across the board. It was very unifying in that way. So I wondered if some of your thoughts about that kind of blended into the storytelling that you, or the storyline that you created.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I think it'll be really interesting to see how books change over the next couple of years as we have these stories coming out. You know, some topics are kind of off limits right now, like pandemic novels. That was a whole subgenre, and now people are kind of tired of living it in real life. But I totally agree that we were faced and confronted with this idea that, hey, we're not doing so hot. Like, we're all having this big existential crisis here. So there's layers of that definitely through the book. And it is interesting how we can kind of see what we were all thinking through reading books, you know, approximately like 3 years after the event happened. Like, we get the books that were written during that time, and we can see like, everybody else was facing this too.
Absolutely. Can I ask a little bit more about the plot, the character specifically, the main character who kind of represents this, in a way, is representing like the human being, and faced with this great unknown force. And can you tell me a little bit more about sort of what that means to you, how that this character formed, and what she means, not just as a person, insofar as a character can be a person, right? But as a sort of a figure in the book.
Yeah, Arwen is definitely the main character of the book because she's the soldier that I spoke of, and she is the one who is going off and having this adventure and discovering this mystery about, well, why Earth, why did aliens come here? But the book does have two point of views, and to me, Arwen is much cooler and braver, and you know, all the things that then I can be. And so I feel like it was almost if I put that into her, like, well, what would somebody who, you know, knew their mind, or somebody who did feel confident in themselves and in their beliefs, what would they do in this situation? Because what Arwen comes up against is she's, you know, fleeing this territory that the Deadlight Guards, the aliens, were really taking over, and she goes north, and she runs into a community in the mountains who offer her safe harbor if she gives up her beliefs and her values. And I think there is the core of her character question, right? We have like our plot question, like, well, what happens to Earth? You know, we have this concept here about Earth losing, where does that go? But for Arwen, it was really, how much of yourself are you willing to give up to be safe? And I think that's something that so many people, so many women in our country face. And that's an ongoing question that we asked of ourselves, and that I wanted to ask of Arwen. And the decisions that she made really set the tone for what she felt her path was, and where she found hope or did not find hope. The other character, Mara, she lives in this this community, and when I did the research for the book, I read a lot about alien life and what potentially it realistically could be like, or you know, why would somebody come to Earth of all the planets in the galaxy and all of these things. But I also read a lot about like modern day current prepper communities, because my idea was that the community that Mara's living in has been closed off from society for a long time. And where would she be? What would she be thinking of, you know, when you have certain perspectives and values that you're given at birth, really, and you've never seen anything else? How much bravery and coolness, again, can you expect from somebody who's in Mara's situation? And so I felt like a lot of the interesting tension, I guess, came from the interactions between them, and having these two different perspectives of somebody who is maybe slightly more educated, but definitely more like worldly, having a global perspective, as opposed to somebody who, you know, has been trapped in this this controlling system for a long time.
Definitely, and I think it's really a really interesting choice to have these characters foil each other. in this science fiction setting. And I'm sure you'll agree, I think that science fiction has some of the greatest potential in literature to sort of examine where we are as a society now and examine the kinds of people we are, especially when faced with challenge. Uh, and so can you talk a little bit more about these two characters and how they play off of each other throughout the story?
Yeah, Mara is questioning a lot of herself in response to Arwen coming into this community, bringing for the first time somebody who Mara did not grow up with, somebody who has perspectives that is different than she is, and balancing her curiosity about those things with her loyalty to her family, her loyalty to the women that are leading this community. One thing I wanted to do in the book is, and I was not expecting this when I started writing it, but create Mara's community as a matriarchy that has control and does not always do good with it. You know, many times when we talk about the patriarchy, or, you know, we think like, well, if things were just reversed, it would be fine. And I think Naomi Alderman's The Power is a really good example of how that likely would not be the case. And, you know, it's not even very helpful to imagine. But I wanted Mara to be, she felt loyalty to her religious and community leaders, and she's questioning for the first time, as you know, humans all do. We've all come to a point where we've gotten new information in our life, or we've met people with new perspectives, and you know how open or willing we are to take those in and allow it to change us was definitely on my mind when writing Mara's sections. And Arwen, you know, she just wants to be safe, really. She's in, I think there's a chapter in The Hobbit, like, that's titled like Out of the Frying Pan and Into the Fire. And she has escaped from the Southwest where this alien stronghold is, but now she's come into this territory where there's other humans that pose a danger to her as well for disagreeing with them. And I think that's something where they both had a motivation for their own safety, but they also wanted to connect as two women, connect as human beings, that they were just curious enough to keep the conversation going.
Something you said too there kind of flipped the switch in my mind, talking about the alien forces as sort of their common danger or their common enemy, so to speak. And I wonder, you know, the alien invasion, the alien war and takeover can be representative of a lot of things in a lot of different fiction. But I'm curious about, as you were writing this and kind of knowing the time period that you're writing this during, what your thoughts are on the alien force as an object in the story, and how that kind of reflects the challenges that these characters are facing, and how maybe they kind of represent in some small way or large way forces that are at work in our society out here in the real world as well.
Yeah, both the aliens and this cult really that Mara grows up in, you know, they're both forces that are bringing hardship upon people. They're both forces that are seeking to control people. And with the invaders, what they're really looking to do is they're looking to strip Earth of certain things. And I think anytime we talk about science fiction right now, futuristic science fiction, we're thinking about climate change a lot. It's just science fiction, like you said, is so rooted in contemporary events, and it gives us space to be able to think about these things, not even just, oh, well, what would this look like in 100 years, but what does this look like and feel like today? Setting a story in the future gives me the emotional space to really deal with some of those things. So that was a big factor for them. Colonialism, definitely another big factor in thinking about, well, what are we if we're societies, or, you know, humans or aliens, if the goal is just to keep expanding and keep removing land and earth and energy and resources from the people that we come into contact with, you know, it burns the system out effectively. And then with Mara's situation, living in the society that she does with the very strict religious control that they have, one of the things that I thought would be interesting to do is, though women are in power in her society, and though they're not doing a great job, they're just being as sexist as the things that we see today, living in a patriarchy. I wanted to put the leaders in the place of valuing some of the things that women are traditionally, pinned to, and see what that would be like for them and how they would deal with it in positive and negative ways.
Absolutely, thank you. And welcome, hello. I want to pivot a little bit and talk about you, the author, and how this writing process kind of reflects your internal process a little bit. By which I mean, again, you wrote this during the pandemic, which is its own, of course, huge thing. But as you're collecting, you said that you did a lot of research, and you're putting a lot of your own sort of thoughts and time and feelings into these characters and into the sort of storyline. So I kind of wonder, this is a question I always have for authors, like where does the line between you and the fiction kind of drawn here? Or is there a line? Is it all kind of just jumbled together?
Yeah, I think oftentimes we think that we're writing something else, but really we're writing so much of ourselves into the story because you can't help but do anything else. So I mentioned the two characters, Arwen and Mara, and it feels like unintentionally I wrote two different sides of myself. The side where I have expectations of myself to do the right thing, to think objectively, to keep moving forward despite any cost to yourself. And then Mara's situation as somebody who has been raised a certain way, who is deconstructing things and dealing with a lot of fear. And I think there's days where I feel more like Mara and days I feel like Arwen. And my next book has 6 point of view characters, so we'll see what that means. But with Mara, especially growing up in the society, I took a lot of, I guess sometimes we think of it as like mulch, right, in your brain. Like as an author, you have all of these life experiences, these things that you've researched, you just let them simmer and see what you can come up with. And some of Mara's experiences are based off of the experiences that I had a child growing up in a religion that was very controlling, that put men above women, and some of the things that Mara faces in her everyday life were things that I saw happening as well. I have not seen any aliens or battled against aliens, so I don't have that, right. It's 2022, who knows? I don't have that experience of Arwen's, but in thinking about how she relates to the world and the despair that she feels about this entire structure around her falling down, I feel that. Yeah.
Absolutely. I think it's curious. It's very interesting to think about how in the action of the story, both of these characters are still experiencing gendered experiences despite the extreme circumstances, right? Mara is still in this patriarchal, sexist religious cult, and Arwen is still facing that as a threat during her journeys and adventures as well. And I think it was very astute to include that as part of their challenges, because these things are so entrenched in our societies and in our minds that even if the world ends, it feels like patriarchy will still be there.
And that's a very good point, because we do have so many books and movies where like the big thing that happens is like, wow, there is this war, or wow, like we've come into contact with an alien culture, and like, oh, that's the big scary thing. And sure, that's big and scary. The big scary thing here is control, is having to live your life in societies that don't let you think freely. I think that many people can relate with That's the scary thing. It's not the exploding building, it's the hold that somebody or a structure has on you.
Right, absolutely. Um, I think this would be a good time, if you would like, to read a quick excerpt from the story.
Yeah, I'd love to. Okay, so we talked about Mara and Arwen and how they're both coming from different places. Arwen is a soldier who's not quite on the run, but she's continuing on wandering essentially across this part of the United States, and she comes into the Rocky Mountains. And Mara has been, she's being punished, and she's sent on this prayer walk where she's supposed to leave the community with any risks to her being like out in nature, but she needs to get herself right if she's going to come back. And this is them meeting for the first time. The first part is from Mara's point of view. I turned into that hut there, and facing me was another human, a human I had never seen before. My thoughts jumbled together as I faced for the very first time someone not from Lillian Springs. My breath caught in my throat and I jerked back. The person was sleeping, leaning upright against the back wall. Enough light poured through the doorway to illuminate the woman. The hairs on the back of my neck raised, and as my thoughts caught up to what my instincts told me, I realized she was dangerous. If she wasn't sleeping slack-jawed, I would have run. She looked like a powerful angel of God, or I felt my insides then, an angel of the dark one. Did it matter which side she was from if vengeance drifted off her like a scent? Black material wrapped her body from foot to neck. In some places, the material was hard like a shovel. In others, it stretched, but with the strength of a wheelbarrow tire. Even as I made the comparisons, I knew they weren't right. What she wore was of another world. A helmet sat by her side, and a weapon lay across her lap, but it was a far cry from the shotguns and pistols we had in the community. I told myself to run, but how could one run from the extraordinary? My eyes darted to her face, which I drank in while she slept. 2 lines of dark lashes crested each cheek. She had tawny brown skin polished as a river stone. Black hair fell in a tangle barely to her shoulder. The edge was unnaturally straight, and I wondered why the ends had broken off there. Then it struck me. Her hair had been cut. My response was visceral. I drew back from her at the thought of this extreme break in taboo. She definitely couldn't be an angel, unless she was fallen. It struck me that she didn't look well. Whereas maybe her skin would normally be rich, it was dull with a gray undertone, and her cheekbones were unnaturally arched. She was starving. She wasn't an angel of death or otherwise. She was human like me, but she was shorn and cast out from her people. She had to have been wandering for a long time for her hair to have grown to that length. What crime had she committed? And did she serve her penitence? My primary excitement fading, I wondered what to do. I could turn around, go home, and never speak of it. I could go back and tell elder sister Hedda, or I could wake the woman up and talk to her. I found that my feet had carried me into the cabin in some ways, but I had to get out of there, or at least go back to the woods and watch while I considered my options. I turned to go, but stopped. I felt something powerful draw me in. More than the pity I had for this woman, more than the worries, I felt God move me. I had already felt her speak to me on a number of occasions, in church during prophecy sessions, during my hard labor with Maddie, and when Papa married good Mother Christy after Mama died. But those were all so expected. This, Lord, what am I supposed to do with this? But hadn't I been sent on a prayer walk? Rachel could have talked to Sister Bethany any time in the last month. Instead, Rachel did so in time for Sister Bethany to send me out that morning. Everything happened so that I would end up here at this very moment. This woman was my answer from God. Outside, after I should head back, and my mind sat now, I would take her with me. I reached out to wake her up, then thought better of it. I retreated outside the door. You who, hello? I made my voice a little louder. Hello, are you awake? The woman groaned and stirred. She moved laboriously and adjusted the gun on her lap. Then she looked up and we made eye contact. A spark lit in my gut and I saw her eyes go wide. I felt my own widen. I put out a hand, palm forward. It's okay. It's okay, I reassured both of us. She lurched to her feet, unsteady and obviously not well, and I backed away from the cabin wary. I was ready to run if I had to, but I was just taking precautions. She looked so weak, I didn't expect trouble. The woman appeared in the doorway, gun in her hands. I froze. She looked me over as she assessed me. The woman did something to the gun and then pushed it behind her on her back. Hi, she said slowly, as if she were tasting the letters. She cleared her throat. I'm Arwen. Who are you? I hesitated. I had never met another person except for new babies. I floundered as I cast about for a response. What's your name? Mara Bennett, I whispered. Arwen looked more and more alert now that she was up. Mara, I was just passing through. I thought this house was abandoned like all the others. I wouldn't have gone in if I had known someone lived here. Oh, I said confusedly. I don't live here. Some of the men stay here when they hunt. The conversation halted. I didn't know what to say to this woman, and clearly she was out of sorts with her being cast out from society for her sins and all. I wondered if she was even allowed to ask for help. You look hungry. No offense, I added quickly. You just don't look well. She, Arwen, made a strange laugh. No, I suppose I'm not doing well. I don't think anyone is. Well, let me see if there are supplies in the lodge and get you fed. I covered my awkwardness by bustling past her through the door. I had prepared travel rations numerous times, but had obviously never eaten with them. I lowered the sack, opened all the jars, and laid them out for the woman to eat. For myself, I dipped my hand in a large canister and slurped the water from my cupped palm. I felt guilty feeding the woman the hunting food, but I didn't think it was specifically a taboo. She wasn't part of our community, and one of my roles was to care for people who needed care. I didn't know if she would make it much farther, to our community or otherwise, without repercussions from her hunger. The large woman ate methodically, not letting one hazelnut drop, like I guessed she was starving. I let her eat as much as she wanted, but she stopped as quickly as she started, a little left in each jar. I don't want to eat all of your food, she said. I almost smiled as I recognized the passive request. She seemed less like an angel by the moment. As strange as she looked, she was human. Please eat, you need it. It was uncomfortable for me to be in the hunting lodge, but also in close proximity, hovering over a stranger. I told her I'd wait outside. In the shade of a red cedar, I sent up a prayer asking for guidance. As if beckoned by God, the woman stepped out. We both sank on the limp summer grass, more room between us than strictly necessary. Do you live here? I do, I said cautiously. I live with many other families in Lillian Springs. We're a strong community. I hope the subtext will be clear. Others knew, well, kind of, where I was and that we could defend ourselves. Arwen. It struck me again what an odd name it was, definitely not biblical. Nodded it as if she heard what she expected. Listen, Mara, this isn't easy for me to say, and I don't want to overstep, but I need help. It sounded like it pained her to ask for it. My heart broke a little for this Jezebel. Of course, I've never been in a situation like yours, but I'd hope that if I was, someone would help me. But Arwen, my speech stumbled over her name. Our community will have rules too. The decision is with the elders, and they will need to know more about your sin before they decide if you can stay. She looked at me with honest shock. What are you talking about? I didn't do any sin. We've all sinned, I gravely intoned, hoping I was living up to the severity of the situation. She laughed. Okay, let's back up. I'll go first. I grew up in Arizona. When the aliens came, my family was evacuated to Colorado. When I signed up, I was moved around a lot, but stayed in the Southwest. So though I don't even know where we are, it's got to be the farthest north I've been in my life. There's nothing left of the base. She stumbled over the words, and I knew she lost something. So I've been wandering. She paused and thought, weighing something out in her head. I've been on the move for about 3 months. What's a base? Arwen stared at me hard, thoughts tumbling in her head. I felt uneasy. I didn't like this meeting new people business. If only Sister Bethany hadn't sent me on an unneeded prayer walk. If only Rachel hadn't ratted me out. If only I hadn't kissed her. Arwen finally responded, as in military base. I was a soldier? I nodded. And what's the aliens? Then we switched briefly to the next chapter, which is Arwen's point of view. I smiled. And then my cheeks drifted down. Holy fuck, she wasn't joking. My eyes darted across her frame. I felt like I was just now seeing it. Her cream button-down shirt was factory made, but her skirt was homemade in a subdued prairie brown material. Long hair ended in uneven tips with summer highlights all the way down. No tattoos, no makeup, no implants, no earrings. It was suddenly conceivable that Mara didn't know about the aliens. Mara, I said just to be sure, are you saying you don't know about the aliens? It felt stupid once it was out of my mouth, as if I asked her if she knew she had eyebrows on her face. She nodded, but squinted at me slightly. Yes, as in, yes, that's correct. I don't know about the aliens, or yes, I'm pulling your damn leg, haha. It was the damn that did it, not the reference to aliens. She gasped as if she had never heard someone curse. Lord forgive you. I ignored her. I hadn't even used the F word. Mara, I was in the military because the Earth is under attack. Alien ships came when I was a teenager, when you were a teenager, and they've been systematically killing humans. We don't know why they're here, but they don't need us, and it doesn't seem like they're stealing resources. Our best guess is that they want the entire planet without us. Oh, I know what you're talking about, Mara said. I nodded in relief. You mean the demons. Thanks.
That's a great excerpt. I love the
Yeah, it's fun seeing them meet for the first time.
it really is. I love the difference in the internal monologues and internal dialogue of the characters. That just stick with me. I'm sorry, I need to recover for a second.
Yeah, I write in third person a lot, but I feel like with this book, because so much of it is their past experiences, first person felt natural, especially for Mara, because so many of us can't really see why Mara makes the choices that she makes. I wanted to back it up with the reasons she thinks she has, or the reasons that have maybe been planted in her head for her.
It's fascinating. I think you did a real bang up job of capturing these two characters' sort of ethos with Mara. You know, Lord forgive you. Yeah, that moment was very fun. Can you tell me a little bit more about kind of structurally how this book came together? You know, with the perspective switching, which I think first maybe some might cause a bit of a tailspin to switch back and forth, but you did it so seamlessly there, where the one moment dropped and the next character picked it up. Can you talk a little bit more about how you arrived at that as your choice to make, and what your experience of writing the book that way has been? Yeah,
and I didn't want it to be confusing for readers because they're both told in first person. So each chapter opens with an image that's specific to that character's point of view. So you have that kind of, yes, we're diving back into this person's head at the beginning of it. But they really, they alternate, and that took some lining up of things. And when I started writing, I had maybe a few scenes in my head. You know, first I had the idea of this woman soldier, Arwen, and then I sat down and I really tried to think out, well, what would that be like? And it was tricky because I had certain scenes and I wanted them to be told by one of the two characters specifically. So we got kind of the more interesting side of things. But for sure, their meeting in the first quarter of the book was a big catalyst for all of this happening, because Arwen has to ask herself, well, what do I actually know about these people? They may be the only people that I've found since, you know, I left my military base. But does that mean that I have to be with them just because they're the last humans I've met? If that's worth the trade-off of being safe and social, the trade-off of, you know, maybe giving up everything you think. And so getting that in line was a very helpful point. And then I knew we'd have a period of time where she's sensing the community Arwen is, and we can see things from her eyes, and we can see through her eyes first, so that we really understand from a newcomer's point of view what's peculiar or what's going on. And then after we see through Mara's point of view, how normal all of this seems. And Arwen is the one that stands out like a sore thumb, and how she thinks that this should just be easy for Arwen to fit in because, well, this is how people are. You know, you're in our community now, like you just need to conform. And so there's a lot of that flipping back and forth where we can see things maybe not quite objectively because a character can't be objective, but maybe a little bit more like most of us might see the community. We see Arwen's perspective first, and then we kind of gather it together in, we see Arwen's perspective, we gather it together into Mara's perspective to get, well, what are the reasonings behind this? What is she carrying into this situation that we don't see? And then I wanted to layer on this mystery that Arwen has about, well, some peculiar things happening around their location in the Rocky Mountains related to the Deadlight Guards, the aliens that have come. And there's still this gap of information. Well, why have they come to Earth? What are they doing? You know, maybe we can't stop it, but maybe we can at least understand why we've been decimated. And so layering these two, and they kind of fight back and forth about what's more important. Of course, Mara thinks it's always more important for them to stay where they are, to follow the rules, to act like everything's fine, to leave it up to her elders to make decisions so that she doesn't have to make the hard decisions. And Arwen is the one who is pushing like, hey, this is not all okay. Hey, this is not safe. And so flipping back and forth between their two perspectives, like really creates the tension, especially in the later part of the book, as things do get more dangerous from the alien side of things.
Definitely. I think it's such a clever way to interrogate the way that a belief system can interact with a force, like an unknown force outside of its control. And especially the choice to interrogate a belief system that, not to presume, but I think many of the readers of sci-fi are probably not intimately familiar with being sort of like religious fundamentalists. They're probably still at home reading the Bible. No, sorry if that's you, everyone at home. But I think it was a really clever way to sort of interrogate how that belief system attaches to a mind and can actually become, I think when we think of people's worldviews, we think, well, mine is a worldview, but yours is optional and adjustable. Whereas if you kind of get into the head of this character, of Mara's character, you can understand really well. Yeah, that excerpt was really demonstrative of just like the abject truth of those beliefs in Mara's mind. I think that's really a cool way to interrogate that.
Yeah, and I think that I wanted to give us some space to think about it too, for even people who maybe relate more strongly to Mara's upbringing and whatnot by flipping things over. I thought for a while about this. I thought like, well, should I make it more like things that I have seen or things that my friends have seen? And that just didn't feel right. It didn't feel like it was doing enough to help us see things from a different perspective, which I think that science fiction like should strive to do. And so I thought, well, you know, in this society, Mara society, they're going to have at some point rewritten the Bible so that God is a she, and the women are going to be in charge, and they're going to still conform to a lot of the gender norms that religious sects of that type adhere to. But that's where they're going to take their authority and their power that, well, hey, we're the ones in charge of the family, like men, you need to listen to us. And I felt like that gave us enough space to see this authoritarian religion differently enough. And perhaps because we have so much of the patriarchy ingrained in us, like it just is hard to see sometimes. And what you just said about like people who come forward with beliefs that they feel like are just absolute or objectively there, and that can cause so much damage when it is seen as, well, this is just what it is. And like, I know that maybe other people haven't gotten there yet, but I believe that so much, this is just how things have to be. And they never take time to consider what that feels like to another person.
Definitely. Thank you for that. Are there some moments that surprised you in the course of sort of arranging the story and developing these characters? Something kind of just come out of you, especially in sort of as the characters develop their relationship as well, that maybe like, oh, interesting.
Yeah, James is Mara's middle child, and I did not plan for him to happen, but it was very realistic that Mara would have children. She would have a family. She was married at a young age, and she sees herself as like leading her family forward. And she has 3 sons. And what would they face living in, a small society, but still a society where what women say is law, and they are the spiritual leaders of the house, and they are the ones who go further in school. What would that do to a young boy? Because we see that happening to girls every day. And Arwen really builds this friendship with James, who is like 10 or 11, and he feels like an outsider in his community because as the middle child, and then also as a boy, Arwen clearly is an outsider because even though she's a woman coming into this matriarchy, she is just off the walls different with her, ideas of equality. And I did not really plan on having this dynamic there, but if I'm going to include characters, I want to make them real, and this was a way to make Mara's kids very realistic to me. So it was a happy finding.
Oh, that's a cool detail.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm a little tangled up here. So we're coming up on time, so I want to get through a few more questions, and then we'll open it up to our wonderful audience member and anyone watching at home. If you have some questions for our wonderful author Rebecca, please type them as a comment in the video that you're watching, and we'll get to them at the end. So my question is more about sort of the outside real world reaction to this book. Have you gotten to see some of the reactions to your work? And if so, what are some that have kind of struck you as really important or really significant?
Yeah, I think sometimes it is hard to take in both the extraterrestrial invasion quality, and then also like, oh no, we're pairing this with this secluded society out in the mountains. And I think that interests people because there are two things that you wouldn't expect to be together that are. I've talked with a number of readers, and I got to do a book group and hear their questions, and it's really interesting to me how carefully they think about character motivations. And I've had people tell me like, well, if I was Arwen, I wouldn't go there. I would just keep hiking. Like she should have just kept going. And maybe there would be a different book if she decided to keep going. And then I have other people who I think are probably in the minority who have said to me like, yeah, it was probably the best thing that she could have done. At least she was safe, at least she had food. Winter's coming on in the novel, and she needed to find a place to hunker down. She's in the Rocky Mountains. And so I really appreciate that readers, I think, took the time to think through, well, what would I do in that situation? And I think sometimes with things like post-apocalyptic or dystopian novels, like that's part of the fun of thinking like, well, what would I do in that situation? And then some good questions from readers as well about the logistics of these extraterrestrials, the deadlight guards. And I don't want to give any spoilers away for that, but what we're seeing with them is more of a minor piece of what's happening across the globe. And there too, people are just curious about like, well, if we're seeing this, what else, like, what is it like in the bigger cities? What else are we seeing? What stories are we missing? And to me, that makes me feel like I built a world that we are curious about what's happening, because it feels there's enough there to feel that curiosity and to be realistic with enough detail, but still inspire your imagination.
Yeah, I think I'm certainly intrigued about what this global alien invasion looks like in other parts of the world, of course. And I also think it's such a unique story to focus kind of to pinpoint in on this small community and these few characters and their challenges, just like a slice of life, slice of post-apocalyptic. And then something you said before struck me about people reacting and considering sort of what their choice would have been. And I think it's always interesting when that thought experiment comes up about the story about such an extreme situation, where
What would you do, Shady?
what would I do? I would probably, I would stay alive, And I'm gonna be honest, and that's the point I was gonna kind of get at. It's, everyone, maybe a lot of people think, hey, well, I'm an individualist. I'd rather hike into the mountains in the dead of winter than give up on like my freedoms and my beliefs. But if this is my opinion right now, if you're dead in the woods, you don't have beliefs anymore. You have nothing.
And how can you change anything after that point?
Exactly.
It's gone.
Yeah, and you can always change something if you're still alive. So I thought that was an interesting point that came up for you to hear that people were kind of saying, well, I would do this or I would do that. And of course, we can't really know because we're not actually being invaded by aliens right now, but we are societally and culturally in a place right now that's entrenched in a lot of extreme decisions, and especially the core of the decision that Arwen has to make is a decision that we all make every day in this country, and as femmes and women and marginalized people of this world. How much of myself do I give to use your phrase, do I give up to be safe? And I'm sure a lot of people in this country right now are making that decision for themselves. It's been really both very loud in the streets of DC and very quiet in some strange and awful way.
I think it's hard for people to find words today with the overturning of Roe v. Wade. And I think that's just another real life example of how much of yourself do you give up to live in a society, and where do you need to draw a line and make a stand for yourself and for the protection of people around you and people like you. And I think that science fiction helps in giving us space to contemplate those things. But there's also wonderful cautionary tales like The Handmaid's Tale, The Parable of the Sower, and there's a lot of work being done by women in science fiction to deal with these issues and hopefully inspire people to find ways in their own lives that they can make a difference and feel less alone through it too, right? If you're reading a book and the perspective affects you greatly, or it's comforting to know, hey, this woman, she was scared about this too, right?
Absolutely, I agree with that. I think we can open up the floor for any questions from our audiences. I'll go ahead and check the screen over here, but if you have some questions, please.
Sure. I love how you've been talking about how things are applicable to really what we're going through on a day-to-day right now in our country and over the world. But, just curious as you were writing in your processes, what were some of the things that you did to keep you motivated while you're writing a book? Because I know sometimes it can be challenging to, see a blank piece of paper and start writing, or a typewriter or a computer or whatever. But what were some of the things that kept you motivated throughout?
Yeah, the question was, what kept me motivated while writing this book? And this is actually maybe my third or my fourth book. So it was motivating to try and actually make the book come to life. This is my debut novel, but I've written books before it. So I knew what to expect with the process. I knew what would be difficult for me. And I have had some experience then with coming up with different ways for me to push through that. I am a huge list maker and a planner. And so really thinking through, well, how many words am I going to write a day to get to this goal? And I think the hardest thing as a new writer as a growing writer is being okay when the words that you've written aren't good, or when you've written a draft and maybe told the things that are supposed to happen in the book, but they don't read like the wonderful things you take off a bookshelf. And that can be really discouraging. And so you have to give yourself grace, and you have to allow yourself to move through those messy stages, because that's the only thing that is going to then allow you to rewrite and edit and deal with these things. And it really doesn't look like a book that you would pick up at the library or local bookstore. It doesn't look that polished until like the very last stage. You have to, bake the cake, and then you get to put the frosting on, and it, gets all snazzed up. But I think, giving myself a lot of grace to deal with those imperfections along the way, combined with just objectively telling myself, like, you just have to do this today because that's what we're doing. And we're staying on track because we have a deadline to get to.
I need that kind of motivation in my life. We have a few questions on the stream over here. Maria says, do I detect a hint of a queer plot line in the reading?
Oh, okay. So to repeat the question from the stream, Maria said, do I detect the hint of a queer plot line in the story? And yes, that is a plot line in the story. Good detective skills. And I think for both of them, so Arwen is coming from a world and a society, even though since she's been a teenager, there has been really tumultuous events in her life. And these, fissures that have run through her family as a result of it. But she's coming from a world that is much more free, open, and accepting of her sexuality. And Mara is in a world where she has never been given the space in her brain to consider that she might be different than her, the fellow women in her society, or to even know that there was another option out there. It is not something that she's like even considered. And that was something that was unexpected as well, that there's so many layers of the tension between them. And as people who genuinely want to help each other, and sometimes they just can't help each other because they're coming from such different places. And we see that happen in our everyday lives too. And we have to think through, like, well, how do you push past that?
Very nice, thank you. Ty Clifford asks or says, can you describe a bit of the design of the aliens that you have for the aliens? So I guess, like, what do they look like? What are their
Ty
what are they
wants
like?
to know what the aliens look like. And you don't know from the cover. You see this ship up there, and it's kind of this big mystery. But the reason that they're so terrifying to Arwen is that anything that her and her fellow soldiers threw at them just failed. So we find out that Arwen has something called a Titan suit, which is like this bodysuit that has this protective armor on it and these kind of ability enhancers, so that when she's running or she's active and her body heats up, it's generating energy for the suit to protect her and make her a little bit stronger. She never gets to the point in the army where she's like equipped with a mech suit. She says at the end that even at the end there was people far more important than she was. But the Deadlight Guards are the aliens that are going across the planet, that are conquering. So we get situations where some of the major cities across the world are just being flat out like bombed out, and then situations where these alien invaders are going in and systematically cleaning cities out, but leaving like the physical structure standing. And they're much larger than humans are, and they have this really durable, flexible skin that's designed to let them shape their bodies in a couple of different ways, as you'll read about, that lets them respond to different situations. But I also didn't want to have this mindless army of invaders that, like, they're just uniformly like made and they're just like out there. And so there's some good kind of hidden features, I guess, about the psyche that is really motivating them to do the things that they wanted to do. I didn't want it to be like a kind of faceless, like monster sort of feel, but understanding where they're coming from too, and how they are interacting as a species in ways that are similar, but also different than us.
Cool. I've always thought it was, I always thought it was really fascinating to see how certain authors write about aliens and what aliens look like in stories. So, you know, sometimes you get the aliens that are just people, but with, I don't know, a little dot on their face or something like that. And then, for example, in Lilith's Brood, the trilogy by Octavia Butler, the aliens in that series are alien, you know, like truly completely different from us, and yet interacting intimately with the humans thinking on the story. And so I think that it's really cool that you took some time to create these alien creatures that are actually estranged from the way that human beings are, and that kind of drives home the
It was a weird researching phase. Just researching, like reading articles or reading like scientific journals that were like condensed down to things that I could understand as somebody who's, you know, not a physicist. Reading about like, well, of all the places in the world, would alien life forms really want to come here? Probably not. But if they did, why would they want to come here? And, you know, what are similarities in like our physiology that would be likely across, you know, different species? But I think that's one of the fun things too in science fiction is there are so many different takes, and it really is like alternate worlds we're experiencing through reading.
That's very cool. Thank you. Got one more from over here. Sid asks, what kind of research did you do on religious fundamentalism, and how did it affect you?
There was some first-person research in the past, but I also did some reading specifically thinking about, I referenced preppers earlier and thinking through where are these groups congregating? Why are they closing themselves off to society? What do they see as their next step? And that's why I said it in the Rocky Mountains. It was a fun setting to dive into anyways. But this is happening today, and this book is set about 150 years in the future. And so it would be possible for this group to close in on themselves, have this huge tract of land, and, you know, only certain groups who are entrusted with this freedom are going out maybe for some supplies, but otherwise they're self-sufficient. There's also, so at some points in this group's history, there's this takeover by the women, and essentially they rewrite the Bible. They make God a she. And so I do include some Bible verses, but change sometimes the pronoun that we give to God. But other than that, there are, you know, so many different ways that people take texts, religious texts, thinking in this case specifically of the Bible, and how they use it for their own gain, or, you know, in a way that maybe was not intended by the original writers or the people who practice that today. There are so many different interpretations out there, and I wanted to dive into this one specific interpretation of people who are using religion as a source of control. And so I did some reading on that too, for, you know, what are the methods that somebody might use to you know, just like psychology wise, like how are they communicating with people in their community to put themselves above others, and, you know, maybe a self-righteous way. And Mara does so many of these things, and she also is, you know, I don't think we can say she's a good person, she's a neutral person, but she's a person just like anybody else. And so that was really interesting for me to dive into. You know, Mara wants to keep her family safe. She wants to, you know, save this newcomer who's coming and who's starving by herself in the wilderness. And yet she keeps doing these things that they don't add up unless you're in her head. And that's why I wanted to write so much of what was in her head. And Shady, if we're going to wrap up, I wanted to read the summary for my next book, if that's all right.
Please.
Okay. So you can go to my website, RebeccaMZornow.com, which you can subscribe to my newsletter, get a free short story, and get news on my next book, which will come out this fall. It's called Dangerous to Heal. It is dangerous to heal oneself. In a galaxy where the last rare resource is unique humanoids, Yanaki knows her ability to heal is priceless. Since her isolationist world died, she lives in hiding on a dry labor planet, mourning the loss of Floban, the man she expected to marry. Yanaki is discovered when she risks healing another migrant worker. Word travels all the way to Earth where Floban lives with his wife. He hasn't seen Yanaki since childhood, but that doesn't stop him from immediately assembling a rescue party or from allowing his wife to misunderstand his connection to the captured woman. As the estranged would-be lovers are pulled across the stars, a student from an elite galactic university is expelled, and an alien who thinks only in the present tense is taken from his planet. Together with an indigenous woman living in the environmentally fractured United States, they discover Earth's enigmatic role in the interstellar human trafficking trade. As Yanaki fights for her freedom, she must ask, even if she escapes, can she ever truly be safe in this universe? And that's Dangerous to Heal, book 1 of the Displacement duology. So It's Over or It's Eaten is a standalone. I think Arwen's going to have a lot of adventures, but we will not see them.
Thank you. I'm very excited about that. And thank you so much for joining me. This has been an incredible talk. I'm so pleased to meet you and to hear about this book. I can't wait to read it now. they're here. And thank you all for being here. Thank you for watching from home. If you would like a copy of It's Over or It's Eaten, we will have some still on the shelves at Lost City Books on 18th Street in Adams Morgan. Otherwise, you can also hop onto our website and order them that way, or at RebeccaMZornow.com as well. Thank you all for joining us.
Yeah, and thank you, Shady, and thank you, Lost City Books. Bye.
It's so good seeing you.
Thank you for coming.
No
It's nice to see
problem.
you.
I'm sorry for being late.
Don't worry
Metro
about
was
it.
the worst trying to get here.
This whole city descended into chaos
I
today.
know. I was like,